rhetorical listeners, and welcome into another episode of the Big Rhetorical Podcast. By now, you should have an idea of what your semester looks like. Your schedule is set. You know where you need to be on Mondays and Thursdays and all the other days. What's your schedule look like? Mine is unique because I have a 5-hour break in between my two classes. Does anyone else have a break like that? Do you like those breaks? I've found that those breaks are oftentimes the most productive times for me during the semester. During my big 5-hour break on Tuesdays and Thursdays, I'll hold office hours. No one ever comes by. So I'm usually just hanging out, working, recording podcast episodes during office hours. You know how it goes. So since I am having a bit of a down semester so far concerning student coming by the office to see me during office hours or making appointments, I wonder, what are some of your tips or tricks or nuggets to get students to come by the office? I don't really enjoy or think it's productive to pressure students, to require students to come by the office. I know some instructors like to do that pre or beginning of the semester meet and greet. All right, come by, introduce yourself. I'm not a big fan of those because we don't know the student's schedule and we don't know how comfortable the student is being one-on-one with me, the instructor, that early in the semester. So I'm not a fan of that. What I really want to know is, what are the things you say? How do you frame a visit to your office hours? Mine are from 11 to 12, so I've thought oftentimes about going to a coffee shop or perhaps going to a restaurant near campus and holding office hours there, but I think that might be an accessibility issue. I am supposed to be in my office, and here I am during my office hours. What do you all think? What do you do? Tweet at us at the Big Red. Post on our Facebook page. What are your tips for promoting office hours to your students? We are talking to Apurba Chatterjee today. I'm excited about this conversation. When I started this endeavor, this project, I wasn't sure how far it would go. I wasn't sure of my reach, right, if you will, or my rhetorical trajectory. But one of the first people to reach out to me was Apurba. She is a Ph.D. student at the University of Sheffield, across the pond in the UK. So that's interesting. Apurba will be our first international scholar that we're going to talk to. She's an Indian citizen working in the UK. That's going to be exciting as we dive into a conversation about the impact of visual rhetoric on Indian bodies during colonialism. But here's the thing. We talk about digital rhetoric. We talk about visual rhetoric. We talk about bodies. We talk about power. We're talking about rhetoric. But Apurba is getting her Ph.D. in history. So the conversation does have a historical cadence to it, if you will, that is quite appealing for some, and I really appreciated that. Admittedly, when she reached out and sent over her CV, I wondered, how would this work? How would this scholar getting her PhD in history be able to join our conversation? But we are interdisciplinary. The field, the discipline, rhetoric is interdisciplinary, and when I accepted that, I was ready to go. I was ready to see what Apurba had to bring to the conversation. So, buckle up. Here's my conversation with Apurba Chatterjee. So you worked on your BA in history at the Presidency College, right? At the University of Calcutta. And is that where you're from?
Yeah, I'm from Calcutta, yeah.
Your family's there?
Yeah.
What'd your parents there? What did they do?
Yeah. So my father is an engineer And he basically worked with the government of India. So he's like a technical analyst who designed weapons and things like that. So it's mostly he worked under the Ministry of Defense. And my mother started her career teaching, but later on when I was growing up, so she had to stop doing that because the thing is like she needed to look after me. So well, like that's a sacrifice that she made for me, really. So, yeah. So my parents they are both into sciences. So my mother had a degree in maths, and my father, as you can say, like it's technical analysis and things like that. So it's more of a very like more STEM subjects, so like very scientific in orientation. So
How'd you
they have
wind
had
up?
both. Pardon?
How'd you wind up in history then?
Oh, it's like a very interesting trajectory. Nobody ever guessed that I would be in history, because this is the thing. Like I, when growing up, I did well in all subjects in school. So like I personally also enjoyed working with all subjects. I wasn't simply studying for grades. I was really enjoying what I was learning and what was introduced to me as a school student. I took an avid interest in learning, like looking at encyclopedias and things like that. So I had a very broad sense of learning from a very early stage in my life. And what I was interested in to see is like people, when it was kind of getting close to time when you have to decide what you want to pursue at a higher level for higher education and things like that, what I was a bit confused about is like, okay, I like all of them, but what do I choose? Because I can't study all of these. But then I started thinking about a subject that can actually help bring all my interests and all my different orientations in different subjects together. And in history, I found the answer. So that's why I ended up doing history. And a teacher of mine from my school, she had a very strong influence on me. Like she taught us history, and she really introduced us to like how interesting and how innovative teaching can be, and then how interesting history is as a subject, and why it is important to learn our about our past. Because see, she and then another teacher I had, like both of them, they basically engendered this view in me that one needs to have a proper knowledge of the past in order to do better in their present and future. So that's how it all started. And yeah, I'm happy I made that choice, really.
It sounds like you had a really great experience at the University of Calcutta.
Yeah, absolutely. It was it was a delight being taught by experts all the time, and these are like stalwarts in their field, and they, when teaching us, they weren't just simply stalwarts like in an ivory tower scenario, but they were really grounded, and they wanted to help us explore our own interests. They always were very interested to hear what we thought about a particular topic, and always made sure that we spoke up and we expressed our opinions on different topics being discussed and taught. So that was really a good starting point, as one may say.
One of the unique things I've noticed about the work that you've done so far is that you have two MAs.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have one from the University of Calcutta,
Mm-hmm.
and then I'm going to say this wrong, I'm sure, but you have another MA from Uppsala University.
Uppsala, that's the Swedish version. Yeah.
Uppsala University in
University.
Sweden.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
maybe you could begin. Tell us a little bit about your master's degree from Calcutta, and then maybe transition us and tell us a little bit about the work you did to receive your MA from the University of Sweden.
That was quite interesting, because my MA at the University of Calcutta is about the history of modern India and world. So I was focused on modern world, which is precisely like late 19th century, basically late 19th century India, like British Indian Empire, and then obviously the history of the world as it was transforming in the 20th century. So that was my subject, and I specialized in the social history of modern India. So there were topics regarding urbanization and like different social institutions such as caste, which is quite prominent in India, and caste and marriage and different things. So I specialized in the social history of modern India. So that was one kind of a study. And while doing all these, while studying these, I developed a very intrinsic interest into the ideologies and the rhetorics on which the British Indian Empire was based, and what is the role of language, what is the role of ideas, and even visuals, which I'll come to in a bit, and why are these important, and how can ideas and language sustain a regime of politics and domination. So that was something that I started taking an interest in. And when I moved to Sweden to do my MA at Uppsala University, my topic of research was British monarchy in the 18th century. That actually gave me some grounding into how to see the working of politics and ideas. And this time I started exploring visual images, really. And I was interested in visual images because I saw that in certain ways, written documents don't give us as much information about something. But if you look at an image from that time, you find even more than you expect to find. So that's something that interested me. And simultaneously, I started developing an interest into alternative source materials when it came to teaching and learning in history, basically. So historians for a very, very long time had based their inquiries on written archives. But the biggest shortcoming with the written archives is that there are certain groups in society which get excluded if you solely put your emphasis on written archives. So that's how I got really interested into visual imagery, because I found that a lot of that is what my whole PhD is about. Like, images inform you much more about different settings and different rhetorics of power than texts would sometimes reveal. Because the thing is, like, you can conceal a lot of factors in texts. You can conceal a lot in images as well. But the way artists deal with these acts of concealing certain anxieties of power is very informing in itself. So that's something that I picked up, really. Yeah.
So what kind of language of power or image rhetorical strategies and images are you seeing, associated with, power and British imperialism and growing up? Give us an example of what you mean.
Okay, so that's very interesting, because the thing is, like, I was a visiting fellow at Yale Center for British Art. So Yale Center for British Art has a permanent exhibition on the growth and progress of British art from the later half of the 18th century. And much of this progress of British art in the 18th century, in the later half of the 18th century, is also associated with the growth of British Empire all over the world. And obviously images also responded to this expansion of British Empire, and a lot of images were produced in that wake, basically. And what happened is, like, when British Empire is extending, it was all about going to different kinds of new places, meeting or interacting with people. So all these people and places, and even flora and fauna as well, of these different areas where British Empire was expanding, they become the subject of British art. So British art in that regard isn't simply confined to Britain. It addresses the empire as well. And in doing that, it kind of tries to highlight the imperial settings, basically, imperial settings of political power, and then also how to uphold that political power, and what are the problems and anxieties in upholding imperial power. So that's something that art actually gets enmeshed in. And that is something that I am studying in my PhD.
You're doing your PhD right now at Sheffield University
Yeah,
in the
yeah.
UK.
Mm-hmm.
Your project title is Imaging Imperialism, a study of visual representation in early British India from 1730 to 1820.
Yes.
That sounds like some fascinating work. Could you tell us a little bit about your experience so far at the University of Sheffield and maybe
Oh,
the people you're working with and what it's like living? Is that in London?
no, it's not. It's north of England, basically. It's like 2 hours away from London.
Okay.
So it's north of England. So yeah, if Sheffield is a fascinating city, Sheffield itself has a very interesting history in terms of its development. So it is basically a Maya. It was Sheffield is very famous all over the world for its cutlery and steelwork. So that was the backbone of Sheffield's economy in the 19th century, basically. And the university kind of developed from the initiative of these people who were earning their fortunes through steel industry. They helped develop the university in order to build up their own respectability in terms of the scenario of the UK, in terms of the socio-political life in the UK. So these are the people. So the university began as an initiative on the part of the elite, the mining elite and the industrial elite in Sheffield. So they invested in it, and then it got royal sanction, and then from them onwards, it developed really. And Sheffield has done distinctively well in certain fields. And Sheffield's history department is one of the top history departments in the whole of the UK. So it's really a privilege to be able to study here. And my advisor is really supportive. So my advisor is a scholar in the rhetorics of mercantilism and power in 17th century. So one can say that how this rhetorics, the whole idea of rhetoric and power informs my work. So obviously I derive a lot from his ideas. So that's what it is all about, really.
Living in the current political atmosphere, in the states that I'm in, it's interesting to see how other international scholars approach the intersections of power and rhetoric and the rise of specific regimes, and then to think about how that's being studied, in my culture as well. You mentioned you were here in the States as a visiting research fellow at Yale, at the Yale Center for British Art in New Haven, and that was for a month in 2018. Am I right about that?
Yeah. Absolutely.
That must have been a heck of an experience.
Oh, it was amazing, actually, on various levels, because first of all, if you are a scholar at Yale, what immediately happens is that you get access to all their amazing art collections, and that is amazing. That was amazing for me. And I had personally seen all of these paintings myself, while working on them and things like that, because nowadays, digitization of images is a big thing. And fortunately, that is in place, because that's really useful for scholars who can't always have access to the images themselves and things. So Yale was an amazing experience, because I got to see all these artworks, and it was amazing to take walks in the galleries and see how things have been placed and how they are displayed and why they're displayed in the way they are displayed, and what kind of language of power and poetics of display one is trying to create through presenting images in a certain way. So that was really interesting. And the best part in Yale was to be able to closely work with the collections, with the digital, not just digital collections, but also the archival collections. So some of the artists I look at in my PhD, they have their archives at Yale Center for British Art. So that was quite interesting. James Wales and James Forbes. So James Wales' work is he has there are 2 volumes of his diaries alongside with different kinds of artworks that he produced while he was in India. And another artist is James Forbes. So Yale has 13 volumes of his manuscripts, like all 13, massive 13 volumes of his manuscripts, which are an amazing source material to have a look at, like to be able to touch those volumes. It's like amazing. So like historians like privilege primary sources, like the sources which were created at the time when the person was living, or that is something that he had created and things like that. So historians privilege primary source a lot. So like being able to touch a primary source is like you are touching history. So that was quite interesting.
You presented a paper there, Visual Arts in British Indian Empire, a study of political authority and legitimacy, at Yale. And I assume that again plays into your larger projects. It seems like everything is connected, which is the way to do things, right? If you're going to be in higher education.
Yeah,
How did that project turn out? The one you worked at and presented at the Lewis Walpole Library Fellows Luncheon.
Oh, first of all, I would highlight here the venue. Lewis Walpole Library is an amazing venue. So it's as if it like transfers you to 18th century itself. The settings is amazing. If you see it, you feel like you are like in a Georgian home. The way the library is built, the gardens are laid out and things like that, it feels like you have been transferred to Georgian era. So it was amazing. The settings are amazing there. And then simultaneously, the people were really nice. First of all, like the curator, the chief curator there. So I knew her beforehand as well, Cindy. So they are all very nice and a very warm atmosphere, I would say. And this paper that I presented there at Lewis Walpole Library basically draws from the first chapter of my PhD thesis. So this is about like men in power. So one of the aspects that I look at in my PhD is about how different people, not just the Indians themselves on whom the British were ruling, but also how the British were presented in an imperial setting, and how can that inform us about the political legitimacy that they were trying to create and project, and how does this happen when we take into account the images. So how, in other words, sorry, I'm just being a bit clumsy here. One can say that how the political legitimacy of British imperial power was projected in images. And that was the subject of my talk there. And when I'm talking about images, I looked specifically at the images of people.
Okay.
The British officials, as well as like Indians, several Indian rulers, as well as Indian Indian courtiers. How were they represented in paintings by British artists and Indian artists simultaneously who were working for the British in an imperial.
So you're looking at bodies and clothes.
Yeah. Sartoriality is a very interesting subject in my whole research. And one can't really ignore it, basically, because they say clothes make it a man, basically. So that's quite interesting, because you can, like, sartorial language is a big thing. It can produce a lot of ideas, and clothing produces a lot of ideas. What you wear tells a lot about you, basically. So that mattered a lot in the depictions, and I focused on that too in my presentation.
So you come back to Sheffield University from your time at Yale, and I see that you have a recent publication from March 2019.
Yeah, exciting.
It's an article titled Visual Arts and British Imperialism in India in the 18th Century, a Colonial Society in the Making, and that was in Discover Society. That sounds, again, like you're compounding your work and making streamlining like this important work together. Tell us a little bit about that work.
I think being able to participate and write and discover society itself was an honor, because this is an academic magazine. It's like a really important academic magazine run by sociologists at University of Sussex. So, and these are like really front-ranking sociologists if you see the world profile really. And that article actually was kind of a response uh, regarding the decolonization of curricula that we are presently thinking a lot about, basically. So that article is a response into these kinds of debates, like how images can sustain a colonial regime, and in a decolonial age, how images can help us, like the how study of images can also help us to decolonize the academic curriculum. So I think like what I said previously was that a big problem with textual sources is that a lot of people, a lot of like one can use like academically, one can use the term subalterns. They get excluded from the larger narratives of power and empire and hierarchies. But images, at the same time, like when texts actually exclude these people, images reveal a lot about them. That's why I personally feel that the study of images is very productive when it comes to thinking about decolonizing our curriculum. Because this is a movement going on in the whole of the UK following a report by the Royal Historical Society, which basically said that the curriculum, the historical curriculum, is like previously has been quite biased because it didn't account very well for the developments in imperial contexts, British imperial context. So it is like increasingly like there are developments trying to redress that lacuna, basically. And I think that images have a very significant role to play if we think about decolonizing the curriculum and how the study of images, because one of the main things that I believe in this regard is that images traditionally, like from the time when British Empire was extending all over the world, the thing is, images were used as a trope of empire. Different tropes of empire came into play into the images, and images played a very crucial role in sustaining various imperial hierarchies, and often also they also helped us inform about the resistance of the people of the colonized and how they responded to the imperial hierarchies of power. So in a decolonial era, I personally think that images can help us see those politics of hierarchies and politics of living in empire and then trying to resist its totalizing claims. I think images can be really productive in that direction. So yeah, that article basically was a fruit of these ideas, so that I tried out, and yeah, people liked it, so that's good.
Fascinating. We'll make sure to tweet that out, that the link to that article. In July 2019, you were named an Associate Fellow of Higher Education.
Yeah, yeah.
Is that right? Did I say it wrong?
Yeah, no, you said it perfectly right. Yeah.
So, and I know that is a fellowship that is associated with your teaching experience.
Yeah.
So, what are you going to be teaching? What are you teaching now, or what are you going to be teaching coming up soon?
Soon I'm going to teach a course on the course that I'm going to teach soon at the university is a survey course. So it's basically starts with a journey from antiquity to modernity. It tries to cover everything, basically. Just a snapshot of what historical developments have been like. So in teaching that course, I think my main agenda would be to put the rest of the world back into the picture, something that might traditionally have been excluded from Eurocentric narratives of history, Euro-American centric narratives of history, basically. So my objective would be to put the rest of the world back in, because I personally believe that European world has been shaped to a great extent by its encounter with the rest of the world, and we need to give the rest of the world its due place in the academic curricula. Like Europe, like obviously if you are teaching European history, obviously you can start from Europe, but my objective is to not to treat it in isolation, but to see it in terms of the wider forces in the world and how Europe responded to it, and how, like, what were the other responses to Europe as well. So that's something that I am very keen on bringing into my teaching for this course.
I'm sure in many ways it also is a part of your Ph.D. Dissertation and everything that you're doing in graduate school, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Because, like, I come from India. It's not just a personal narrative that I'm trying to bring in, but it's the experience of a lot of people. We personally are seeing like what is going on in the world. We are aware of various developments. So it's all about like putting. It's not just, I wouldn't say it's not giving the voiceless a voice. It's about, because these people have their voices. We just have to hear them. I don't think they're voiceless. They have a voice. We just have to develop a sympathetic ear to accommodate and hear all their voices. So that's what I think my objective is to bring in my teaching. So it's not just about like colonizing regimes. It's also about people, like it's also about people with disabilities, for example. We need to hear them. Like probably we can't consider them as voiceless. They probably have a different way of expressing themselves. So it's all about being more accommodative to the world around. Make sure that everybody can say what they want to say, like creating a more balanced platform for everyone to be able to contribute, so that we can enrich the curriculum and we can enrich ourselves with each other's experience. So that's what my objective is about.
What are some of the intersections that you see in your work with visual rhetoric and images with the work going on in writing studies, either where you're at or in another more global perspective?
It's quite interesting, because the thing is like, if I can consider it from the vantage point of post-colonial scholarship, it tries to basically read against the grain and like enshrining into the era of ushering into the era of post-colonialism and decolonizing motives. Basically, we are also taught to read things against the grain in order to recover that voice which has been silenced. So I think in that way, my work, as it tries to recover the intentions of the subject populace, is very interesting. Like it matches very well with the writing studies agenda as well, to read against the grain, to look at the context in which something has been written and something which has been excluded, to try to find something which has been excluded from what has been given. Obviously, this does require a lot of theoretical and methodological sophistication, but given that, the whole agenda is to read against the grain. And also this maybe is it is also important to think about writings of people who have traditionally not been able to participate in the Republic of Letters, basically. So it's also about looking at third world literature as an example, and how they interact and what they bring to the palette. So that's something which I find very fascinating, because I myself look at a lot of post-colonial literature for my own work. And then I personally have to read a lot of text. I do research visuals, but then at the same time, I have to read a lot of published as well as unpublished records from the 18th century. And it's pretty much about reading them against the grain and trying to see what was not meant to be seen in there, and how our historical distance from a time and how the changing mentality enables us to find those voices which have been silenced in these writings. So it is not like a unidirectional approach. I think there are different things coming into it, and it also depends on from what methodological or what disciplinary approach we try to put into it. So yeah, I guess it's different for everyone.
Apurba, anything else you want to add before we let you get off here? I know that there's quite a bit of a time difference since you're over in the UK and I'm here in Central America.
I guess you have pretty much covered everything, but in terms of if we think about the rhetorics and why someone working with visuals and how we can bring them into the frame of rhetorics, I think it's important to consider visual rhetorics besides textual information, because the thing is, like, nowadays I think it is important for us to broaden the definition of language, and I think visuals definitely have a role to play in there. Signs, visuals has an important role in redefining as well as being assimilated into the whole idea of language. So language is not simply written or spoken, it is something that we see as well. So I think that's quite interesting. And power obviously matters a lot. It has mattered, it will matter. It comes down to us how we approach it, and from what perspective we want changes, or do we want the changes as well. So that's, yeah, all of that comes together basically.
I wish you well and continued success as you work to decolonize visual rhetoric, power, and etc. The curriculum.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks. Thank you, Apurba.
It was nice chatting to you. Bye.
So that was my conversation with Apurba Chatterjee. Things went well, I think. I was admittedly, and I admitted this to Apurba, nervous about the connections, how strong the connections between her work that she's doing and the work that I'm doing with this podcast would be. But they seem to be quite clear, especially when she started talking about decolonizing the curriculum. Hey, rhetorical listeners, do you have a project that you're working on? Are you an emerging scholar? Perhaps you're about to hit the job market, or you have a new article or book coming out? Sign up to be a guest on the Big Rhetorical Podcast Emerging Scholar Series, a place that offers participants the opportunity to contribute to ongoing conversations within our disciplines and beyond. Over time, this record of conversations will be a vast catalog of dialogues, a digital archive with the potential impact knowledge making and rhetoric, writing studies, and technical communication. For scholars and practitioners, the Big Rhetorical Podcast Emerging Scholar Series offers the opportunity to gauge the future of rhetoric, writing studies, and technical communication by learning more about the research of graduate students and less seasoned scholars. I want to thank Apurba for joining us all the way from Sheffield University in the UK. I felt stupid. I thought Sheffield University was in London. She's right. It's famous. I'd heard of it. But still, I thought it was in London. That's okay. All right. Hope you're buckled up. The semester's underway. Hope things are going well for you. Make sure to leave us a review. Make sure to like us, retweet us, follow us, listen to our episodes wherever you get podcasts. Stitcher, Anchor, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play. It doesn't matter. Search the Big Rhetorical Podcast and make sure you listen today. Are you interested in being a guest? Are you working on something cool? Is your project taking shape? Are you about to hit the job market? Reach out to us. We want to profile your work, acknowledge your labor, and highlight your scholarship. Until next time, be kind to one another and always be listening rhetorically.